Episode 2: Warmth of Winter. As I said before, winter had come, and the warehouse was a cold place to have to walk every 2 hours. It wasn't as cold as outside, but the quiet and stillness made it feel as if it was. To tell the truth, after that night when the helmet was left on the top of my car, I almost quit. Winter has always been a rough time for me, and working a 12-hour shift made it so I never got to see the sun. It was dark before my shift and still dark when I finished each morning. To say the least, I was depressed, and the more I looked on the internet at the stories that people posted about strange things that happen in the woods, the more of them I believed. There was one thing for me that winter, I will always be grateful for. On Saturday nights I would go out to eat at Sally's restaurant, where I would get to talk with Lynn. To most people, this may not have been much, but at the time anything that made me feel normal was a good thing, or so I thought. Just as I was about to head out to dinner at Sally's, my phone rang. It was my friend's supervisor, who was the man who had gotten me my job at the warehouse. He called to let me know that my supervisor would be stopping by on Monday night and was bringing a new guard with him. I wondered just what the supervisor knew about what went on at the warehouse. He didn't tell me who the new guard was or why they were coming, but right then I only wanted to go to dinner where I would get to see Lynn, even if it was just when she took my order. In that first 3 months at the warehouse, she was my only anchor to reality. I got a real surprise when I arrived at Sally's that night. I expected to see Lynn in her cute waitress uniform, but to my surprise, she was standing there in street clothes, smiling. Bewildered, I just stared at her. She giggled at the look on my face and told me she had taken the night off and wondered if I would have dinner with her. I told her of course I would and suggested we take a seat. She shook her head and told me not there, but at her ranch, and she was cooking. She made me forget all about working at the warehouse that night. Her ranch had been in her family for 150 years, and she had lived there her whole life. Her mother had moved to town a couple of years ago after Lynn's father had gone missing on a hunting trip. She had a few cows, horses, and a couple of acres of growing land. She had one ranch hand to run the place, who had worked there for years. The meal that she cooked was exquisite, and I had to ask her just what it was. Telling me it was an old family recipe for ham, and I was surprised that it didn't taste like any ham I had ever had before. I asked her just what type of seasoning she used, but she just giggled and said that if she told me she would have to kill me. She had sworn an oath to her grandmother that she would only teach it to any daughters she might have. At the time I didn't pay much attention to the fact that her father had disappeared, and the other thing at the time was her ranch was not more than 3 miles from the warehouse. I was too taken with Lynn to really think about the way my life had become, and she was making me feel normal. I do believe if I had not met Lynn I would have quit my job. I must tell you that weekend was one of the best that I have had in my life. She had to be back at work at 8 on Sunday night, and I didn't have to be back at the warehouse till Monday at 6, so I had time to rest before work. This was a good thing as I was to meet my supervisor for the first time after being on the job for 3 months, and he brought a new guard with him. They were to arrive at 7 so I would have time to check on where I had hidden the helmet and make sure it was still safe. There was no way I was going to let him know about it. I wondered if he knew of any of the things that went on at the warehouse. The eyes that watched from the edge of the woods, or the file that would be left on the floor. There were also places where I felt I was not welcome to be at times. I would try to avoid them as much as I could. Right at 7 on the dot, a big black Ford sedan pulled up. I was standing at the door watching through the window. The driver got out as it started to snow lightly, and he opened the back door. A man in his 6's, dressed more like a senator than a security guard supervisor, stepped out of the car, followed by a young woman. She didn't have the look of a guard. I thought she may be his secretary. Now I'm only going to give first names and not going to give you their real names. The old man introduced himself as Samuel and he worked for the Department of Defense, and he was my supervisor. DOD, I thought I was working for a security company at a government warehouse, not working for the DOD. I was not sure if I liked this at all. I would never have taken the job if I knew that I would be a government employee. I had no love for the government, believing they never have the people's interest on top of their to-do list. He saw by the look on my face that I was not a happy camper and explained my job was not an accident or just luck of being picked. I had been chosen for the job. I asked him what he was talking about, and he told me that it had to do with a lot of factors. Where and when I was born, to my blood type, and the color of my eyes, which were light blue. Saying he would speak with me at a later date about all this, but now his time was limited. He knew all about what went on at the warehouse and had for years. He turned to the young lady and told me she was Dr. Ricky, and she had several doctrines. I found this surprising, her being so pretty and no more than around 25 or so. She told me she was there to study the paranormal happenings at the warehouse. Her crew was setting up all her equipment the next day and she would be joining me for the night shift. I looked at Samuel, who nodded his head and added that she was staying at the bed and breakfast and would need a ride. I told them I didn't mind. They said good night and out the door, they went. That was just the start of a strange night for me. On every walk that night there were stacks of boxes off the shelves, and for the first time, there was even a little fog down one lane of files. Needless to say, I didn't go down there. A couple of times I heard sounds that I had no idea what they were. I had the feeling that the warehouse didn't like the idea that Dr. Ricky was there. At 6 a.m. when I left, I noticed that there were eyes watching from the woods. That was when I realized that Lynn's ranch was just a few miles behind that section of the forest. I would have to ask her if she had ever seen them around her ranch, and what she knew about her father's disappearances. Being raised in the area, she may know a lot about the things that happened in the park. Dr. Ricky turned out to be a nice person, and very passionate about her work. I did wonder how a young lady that looked as good as she did had been able to get several doctrines without young men getting in the way. I never bothered to ask her at the time what her doctrines were in, assuming she would not be able to tell me under national security issues. She told me to drop the doctor and just call her Ricky, as it was only going to be the two of us. As we were headed into work that first night, we passed 3 large trucks on the way out, and Ricky said that it was good. It meant that all her equipment had been installed, and was at the ready. The day guard was standing outside smoking when we pulled up. He handed me the lock key and said good luck, got in his truck and was gone in no time. He had not even given me time to introduce Ricky to him. I looked at her and she was smiling as if she had expected this type of treatment or had experienced it before. I had checked the weather before I had left home. It was not going to snow, but it was going to get windy and the temperature was going down into the 20s before dawn. I opened the door and let Ricky enter before me, and it was best that I did. When I stepped in, I stopped dead in my tracks. It no longer looked like the office that I had been coming to for almost half a year. The old desk was gone and in its place was a brand new oak one, 2 times the size. The old couch had been replaced by 2 new recliners, and that was the least of my surprise. The wall with the door into the warehouse had 10 or 12 filing cabinets, and the other had 10 computers and each had its own monitors, on a countertop that run the whole length. There were 2 seats on wheels for working at the computers, which looked to be comfortable if one had to spend hours in them. I didn't have time to marvel at the change long. I had to make my first walk through. I told Ricky that I would be back in a few minutes, but I don't think she heard me as she was already turning on the computers, not even taking off her coat. On my way back from the basement, I saw a book laying just in front of a rack of files. I reached down, picked it up, and was about to put it back on the shelf when I heard Ricky's voice tell me not to put it back but to bring it to her. I looked around but was unable to see any cameras. She had to have seen me on one of the computer monitors. I was not so sure that I liked the idea of being watched like that. I did as she asked, and when she looked at it, smiled, and asked me if I looked at the title. I shook my head, no, and she handed it back to me. I looked and was kind of shocked. The title read The Reality of Unexplained Paranormal Experiences by Dr. Ricky. She was amused by the look on my face. She explained that the government had classified the book, and my finding it just then meant that the warehouse knew she was there. I asked what she thought was going on in the warehouse, and she said it wasn't just the warehouse, it was the whole park, but the warehouse was at the center. Once the marine survivalist went missing, she was called in. The first thing she did was learn all she could about the area, going as far as having new satellite pictures made, including infrared and something new called LiDAR. I asked if she should be telling me all this, and her answer was that the day I took the job I was given a top-secret security clearance, even if I didn't know it. It would seem that my life had become a B-movie. She told me that this new LiDAR showed what was underground, and they found that the warehouse was sitting atop a huge cavern, almost a mile deep, with many tunnels. It dawned on me that this was the warmth of winter that the creatures in the woods would need to survive the cold. I asked her what she thought the cavern had to do with the paranormal happenings in the park. She said that was why she was there, to find out what the cause was and how to stop it. At the time I thought this a little funny, to think that a young woman of 25 or 26, even with a few doctrines, and a rookie security guard could really do anything to stop what was happening there. It took a week before Ricky was able to video anything that may be called paranormal, and that was a group of file boxes just dropping off a shelf, but to me, it looked like they had just fallen, not being put up there securely in the first place. We did see the eyes watching from the woods as we left in the mornings a couple of times. Over the next few days, I talked with Lynn a couple of times on the phone and told her about Ricky. She acted as if she didn't mind, but I could tell she was not comfortable with the idea I was spending so much time with her. I was not able to tell her the real reason why she was there, so I told her my boss wanted to change it to a two-person watch. I didn't like the idea that I couldn't tell her the truth about the warehouse. That Saturday night I didn't go to dinner at Sally's as I had been, but instead showed up at what would have been the end of Lynn's shift, only to find out that she had taken the night off. I had talked with her the night before and she had not said anything about it, and I thought this a little strange and hoped that she was not getting sick. I decided to go by the ranch and see if she was okay, even though it was just past midnight, knowing that she would normally be up. Being mid-March, the weather was getting warmer, and most of the snow was gone. The air was still cool, but it was a nice clear night. I topped the hill about a half a mile before the ranch and was surprised by two Ranger trucks parked just off the road. I thought it best to pull over and see if they may need some help, but when I got out there was no one around. One of the trucks was the head ranger Bill's, the other were Jeff's, who also worked at the warehouse as a guard on the weekends, and really should have been at work right then. I yelled out to let them know I was there. A moment later Jeff walked from the trees, and when he saw that it was me, he told me to be quiet and follow him. After a 2-minute walk, we met Ranger Bill standing overlooking Lynn's ranch. They didn't need to say anything, nor would I have heard it if they did. I was shocked by what I saw. The ranch was lit up like a country fair, and there had to be a good 200 people standing in a semicircle in front of what looked to be an altar. On the altar was a calf. Standing next to it was Lynn, holding up a knife. It made my head spin, and my knees became weak as I realized what was going on, and who was doing it. Lynn moved her arms around as she was speaking to the group. I was unable to hear what was being said but could hear the group cheering her on. I looked over at the Rangers and noticed that Bill was recording it. I looked back and noticed that behind Lynn, just inside of the wood line, were the glowing eyes that I had seen all along at the warehouse. The group began to chant. As the noise grew, Lynn suddenly reached around the calf's neck, and in one swift move slit its throat. Steam rose in the cool air as the blood poured over the altar and onto the ground. I had just witnessed a sacrifice that was held by my girlfriend, so to say the least I was shocked. Jeff grabbed my shoulder and told me that we needed to move. I followed them back to the trucks where Jeff told me to go home and not to tell anyone what I had just seen. It was only a 15-minute ride, but it felt as if it took an hour. I found it hard to keep my mind on the road. I also found it hard to believe that the sweet woman who I had so much feeling for had turned out to be some kind of evil princess. I got home and sat down. I didn't even turn on the TV or get online. I noticed that Ricky was still up, but I was not sure if I should tell her about what I saw. If there was anyone who may understand, it would be her, but could I trust her any more than the woman I thought of as my girlfriend? I must tell you that night was when I realized that I would never have what others would call a normal life. I wonder just why it was me that was chosen for the job at the warehouse. Samuel had told me he would explain at some point, but for now, I could only wonder. I'm not the kind of person that would let things slide by me without finding out why things were the way they were. I needed answers even if I didn't like them. I could just pack a bag, jump in my truck and get the hell out of there, or should I stick around and try to deal with all the strange things that were happening? It really was a simple choice to make, but my mind was spinning, my emotions were on high alert and were going to take some time for me to make a decision, so I guess that I'll just have to get back to you on that.